Next part of microbiology that we'll be starting with is mycology. Now, mycology, as all of you know, deals with what? It deals with all the fungal organisms that you have, and especially after the era of COVID, fungal organisms have become extremely important in all your exam patterns. Now, we are going to divide this chapter in a very logical manner. First, we'll start with the introduction and the classification part. After that, once you've got a basic outline of what exactly the chapter holds for you, we'll be going ahead. We'll be talking about every fungal organism in detail, and we've decided to go system wise. When I say system wise, from superficial to deep fungal infections is what we'll be talking about. So let's begin right away. The first thing that I'll be teaching you is the structure of a fungus, and in that you have two aspects, a cell wall and a cell membrane. Please remember, the cell wall is going to contain chitin. So the cell wall of all the fungal organisms will be containing chitin. Similarly, the cell membrane of all the fungal organisms is going to have ergosterol, but here we have an exception. Please remember, all of them are going to have ergosterol in their cell membrane except one very famous fungus which you must have heard of, and that is Pneumocystis carinii. And there's a very famous other name also that you know it by, and that is Pneumocystis jirovecii. So all of you know that this is a very common infection that you find in HIV positive patients, right? When the CD4 count goes below 200, we'll be talking about it. So this is an opportunistic infection in HIV positive individuals. And what is special about it? That it does not have ergosterol in its cell membrane. Well, this was the basic outline about it. What are we going to go on to next? We are going to start off with the classification based on the morphology. So what do you need to know? There are 4 groups. Now that is how we've classified the entire fungal system. The first group of organisms is known as the yeast. The second one is referred to as yeast-like. The third one is said to be mold or hyphae. And the last one is the most famous out of all of these, and that is the dimorphic fungal organisms. So please remember, yeast, yeast-like, mold and dimorphic. Let's go into that one by one. Let's talk about their details. So when I talk about yeast, the first one that I've put up in this category, yeast. Do you know what you understand by yeast? I'll draw one organism over here and I'll show you a small little bud coming out of it. So in very simple words, please remember, yeast is nothing but the budding form. It's going to show you presence of buds. Apart from that, please remember, there is something known as the second one, that is yeast-like. When I say yeast-like, means the element of yeast has to be there, means there is an organism and it is going to show you the budding, so the element of yeast is there. But apart from that, sometimes these buds become very, very long. So instead of looking like a tiny little bud like this, it's going to look like a long bud, and from which that another bud is going to come out and another bud is going to come out. What is this long buds known as? These are referred to as the pseudohyphae. So when we zoom into these two pictures, all of you can clearly analyze that I have a particular organism and it's showing me a tiny little bud here. So what do I call this? This is said to be the budding form. Whereas now in the next picture you see those tiny buds have become very long. So what would you now want to call them? Now they will be referred to as the pseudohyphae. So please remember that a yeast-like organism is the one that is going to show you both the yeast the phenomenon, that is the budding, and the pseudohyphae, of course. And what are the examples that come under it? So please remember, yeast is going to include Cryptococcus, and yeast-like, which are going to have the pseudohyphae, they will include Candida and Malassezia. These are the two main set of organisms that you have to learn. Repeating, yeast is going to have Cryptococcus and yeast-like will have Candida and Malassezia. Now, there is one information which I want students who are particularly targeting the INI-CET exams, you guys should be knowing, that in the yeast variety, there is another set of organism which is known as Saccharomyces. Now, let me ask you, where else have you studied Saccharomyces cerevisiae? I'm sure you've heard of this particular thing. Where have you read Saccharomyces cerevisiae? So go back to your medicine lectures and even your pathology lectures. Saccharomyces cerevisiae is a very important organism that you have studied in Crohn's disease. And over there in Crohn's disease, you have also studied that there is an antibody called anti-Saccharomyces cerevisiae antibody. So now you exactly know where that Saccharomyces has come from. It's come from the fungus. And which family of fungal organisms? From the yeast, the budding form. Another extra edge information for the INI CET that I want to tell you is a set of two more organisms which are known as Trichosporon and Hortae. I'll be teaching you those in a while. Trichosporon and Hortae belong to the yeast-like species, means they are going to show you the pseudo hyphae also. Okay, so that was extra information. Now, having discussed the yeast and the yeast-like, having discussed these two, we are going to go ahead and talk about the mold or the hyaline form, the mold hyphae form, and that is exactly what you have to know. So look at what I've written over here. I have eliminated the word pseudo. Now there is no long budding. Now there's actually going to be a long single structure called a hyphae. That is what you have to know. So this hyphae is known as a mold form, and it's of two types. See, one is aseptate, means it's a straight line like this. It's going to be a straight line like this. And the other one is septate. When I say septate, means there are going to be further segments that are present inside it, septa that are present. So let me ask you a question. Which one of these would you call, or what would you categorize this as? So as you can see, there are hyphae, but I can see lines inside it. So which one would I categorize this as? As the septate hyphae, right? Okay, so now having said that, the aseptate hyphae, because as soon as I say aseptate, the COVID era comes up in front of you, because remember the black fungus, remember the mucor. The mucor is aseptate, and mucor belongs to which family? It belongs to the Zygomycetes. So Zygomycetes is a family which has a lot of organisms, but mucor is the hero of the story after COVID, of course. So remember, the mucor is aseptate, so that family, Zygomycetes, comes under it. Comes the tough part, which are all the ones which have septae. And if you see, I have divided further into two categories. One is going to be phioid and the other is going to be hyaline. What do we mean by that? See, phioid has the word melanin written in front of it. Means that this is the one that is going to include a pigment. There is going to be some element of pigment. How have I learnt it? I'll tell you in a while. Hyaline, on the other hand, there is not going to be any pigment. So now I'm going to change the, the methodology or the pronunciation a little. So now I'm going to call it melanin. Why am I calling it melanin? And hyaline, I'm going to call it as hyaline. That is how I'm going to change the terminology. I'll call it hyaline, because now remember that under the melanin one, why did I say melanin? Because all the things are going to come under it. Means Piedra, Alternaria, Madurella, Curvularia. These are all the ones which are going to contain melanin or phioid. So repeating, Piedra, Alternaria, Curvularia, Madurella, AA things. Whereas when I'm talking about hyaline, why did I emphasize on the Y sound of it? Because all the UY sounds are going to come under it. Means what? When I'm talking about the Fusarium, Acrimonium, Penicillium and Aspergillus. So all the UY sounds come together. That's the best way, rather than learning it as mnemonics, which are usually written in other textbooks, and we honestly never tend to remember those mnemonics later on. This is the best one. So remember, whenever they're talking about melanin, all the AA things will come. And whenever they're talking about hyaline septate, all the UU sounds are going to come across with it. Finally, with which we wrap up our third feature also, that is the mold or the hyphae. What are we left with? The fourth one, and that is dimorphic fungus. Now, when I'm talking about dimorphic fungus, and after that I'm going to take you to a recap also. When we talk about dimorphic fungus, the word itself is making a lot of sense over here. That means this is going to exist in two morphologies. There are two morphologies in which it exists. What are those? Both the forms that we studied. Till now, we have studied something known as the yeast form, which is going to have that budding. And the other one is known as the mold or the hyphae form, which is going to be a true hyphae. So there are two forms, and this fungus exists in both. It can exist in a yeast form also, and it can exist in a mold form also. So what do you have to know out here? Remember, yeast is going to be present at 37 degrees centigrade. Mold is going to be present somewhere around 25 degrees. Some books mention 22 to 25. Some mention 25 to 28. So because there's so much of confusion, I've taken up the center value, that is 25. So how do I learn this? Which feature is at which temperature? So remember, the way you say yeast and heat are rhyming. Mold and cold is rhyming. That is how you learn it. So yeast is heat, means it's at a higher temperature, 37. Mold and cold is rhyming, lower temperature, that is 25 degrees. Now, well, having said that, which are the organisms that are going to come under this, that they can form yeast also, they can form mold also? So see, am I not talking too much about temperatures, 37 degree, 25, heat, cold? So that is how you learn. That is the mnemonic. So the mnemonic that you have over here is body heat probably changes shape. Body heat probably changes shape. So what do I mean by that? That now let's start with the answering of these. So B stands for blastomyces. B stands for blastomyces. H stands for histoplasma or histoplasmosis. P is going to actually have two things. P is going to be Penicillium marnefi. P is referred to as Penicillium marnefi. P is also for paracoccidioidomycosis. Paracoccidioidomycosis. Next one, the C. The C is going to be for coccidioidomycosis. And lastly, the S that we have is for sporotrichosis. Sporotrichosis. So let's do a recap over here, guys. When I say body heat probably changes shape, B is going to be for blastomyces, H for histoplasmosis, P for two things, Penicillium marnefi and paracoccidioidomycosis, C for coccidioidomycosis, and S is going to be for sporotrichosis. Now, well, having said that, this is body heat probably changes shape, and easy to learn mnemonic because I'm talking about different temperatures. So the mnemonic is in hand with it. Okay, coming all the way back, that finishes off the classification for us. We have yeast, then we have yeast-like, then we have mold, and then we have dimorphic. Want to do a very quick recap? Yeast is going to have the very famous Cryptococcus for all of us. Yeast-like is going to have the two very famous, that is Candida and Malassezia for us. Then we have mold, that is going to be the hyphae form, which can be of two types. Either it is not going to have septa, which is going to have the hero of the story, that is Mucor zygomycetes, or it is going to be septate. Remember, under septate further there are two varieties. Either it is going to have melanin. So remember, melanin had all Piedra, Curvularia, Madurella, all the AA things. And the other one is going to be hyalene. So that was going to have all the YU sounds, acrimonium, fusarium, all those U sound ones. Coming lastly to the dimorphic fungus, and in dimorphic fungus we have body heat probably changes shape. So these were the organisms that were put up under it. That's a very quick summary of the classification on the morphology that we have done, because here I was only talking about the shapes. Now I'm going to move ahead and talk about the next form, which is based on the spores. So when I say based on the spores, every fungus can either have the presence of sexual spores, that's one possibility, or it is going to have the presence of asexual spores. So there are two things that it can have, that is sexual spores and asexual spores. Now first, learn the mnemonic of any one of them so that the other one becomes easier. So when I say sexual spores, we are going to learn ZABD, or ZAB also is good enough, and everything other than that will come under asexual variety. So how do I learn this? Remember, when I'm talking about the sexual spores, as I just now told you, sexual spores are going to be ZABD. So what is ZABD, and especially ZAB? Means we are talking about zygospores, ascospores, and basidiospores. So what is ZAB? Zygospores, ascospores, basidiospores. Firstly, no points for guessing that zygospores are seen in which family? They are seen in the zygomycetes family. Yes, and don't worry if you don't know the members of it, we will get to know eventually. So zygospores are present in the zygomycetes family. Ascospores are going to be present, A for A, in the Aspergillus, and basidiospores are going to be seen in the presence of Cryptococcus. They are seen in, again, B, C coming together. So basidiospores are seen in Cryptococcus. Let's do a recap. When I'm talking about the three, that is ZABD, we have Z for zygospores, that is zygomycetes, A for ascospores, which is Aspergillus, B for basidiospores, which is seen in Cryptococcus. I have a couple of pictures over here that you can see. So you will obviously see there's a long structure over here, and I can visualize that there are some tiny structures inside decided these are the ascospores and this will be labeled. So if this is a labeling of an ascospore, which organism will you think of? You'll think of A for A, you'll think of Aspergillus. Similarly, the next one, you can see a Basidia and you can see the Basidiospores which are coming. As soon as you see Basidia, which organism will you think of? You will be thinking about Cryptococcus. So having said that, this was about the ZAB. Why did I call it ZAB-D? There is another family of fungal organisms which are known as Fungi imperfecta. Remember, they do not have any sexual state or sexual spores, and that is why they are referred to as Fungi imperfecta. Again, something that can come to you as a one-liner if at all. So repeating, when I'm talking about sexual spores, we have the mnemonic ZAB-D, and after this, whatever will be written will come under asexual. So now let me show you all the miscellaneous ones quickly. What all can we see over here? We have something called arthrospores. Now, what are arthrospores? I've got you some pictures. See, there are some pictures which will come without a labeling, which you have to identify. So this picture over here is the photo of arthrospores. And please remember that arthrospores are very, very characteristically seen in coccidioidomycosis. Right now, I am not showing you or giving you any mnemonics, because for all these fungal organisms, I'll give you mnemonics. Then this part of fungal morphology will become very, very simple. Right now, you're just becoming familiar with what all terms we have, right? So yes, coccidioidomycosis, and let me tell you, even dermatophytes, even the dermatophytes are going to show you the arthrospores. But just remember, look at this picture. There's a question you'll find in your Q bank and your PYQs. How do you identify arthrospores? They are condensation of the different fungal elements. It looks as if, if I try to draw it, it will look like this was a fungus hyphae, and that hyphae basically divided into multiple segments. That is the kind of appearance it gives. So very commonly there's a question on arthrospores that comes, that arthrospores is the condensation of hyphal elements. It's the condensation of the different hyphal elements. Go back to your Q bank, you will find this question. Okay, coming to the next, we have something called blastospores, which you just have to know. So I told you, other than ZAB-D, everything is coming over here. So blastospores is here. Then we have sporangiospores. Sporangio is the one on which you get a photo, and you see that on the bottom side. Okay, you can see a sporangiophore and you can see sporangiospores coming out of it. You can see those round ball-like structures and those sporangiospores inside it. That is something you are going to find in zygomycetes, the same hero, mucorvala, zygomycetes. So now that gets me to a point of thought, and that is that when we are talking about the zygomycetes, right now only you will say that I had told you a mnemonic called ZAB-D for sexual spores, and I told you that, if I take you back, I told you that zygomycetes is going to show you zygospores, which was a sexual spore. Now, so that I can write that the one type of spore is going to be the zygospores, right? On the other hand, now I'm saying you're also seeing sporangia, so you're also seeing sporangiospores. So can I say this is basically showing you both? This is that one family. This is that one family which is going to show you both the sexual forms also and the asexual forms also. The sexual form is simple. For zygo, it is zygo, that is zygospores, and asexual form is those round structures called sporangiospores. Other than that, where there is something called C for C, chlamydospores. Can you see these spores with a double wall? These spores with a double wall. So that is how you identify the double-walled spores. They are seen in C for C. When I say C for C, we mean Candida. So remember, chlamydospores are seen on candidial infection. And lastly, you have these two things written, conidia, which is macro and micro. So no brownie points for guessing that the macroconidium is going to be large and the microconidium is going to be small. And I'll tell you eventually which organisms show this. So having said that, these are the classification on the basis of the asexual spores that we have. So if I can come all the way back and tell you what all was I going to discuss, like I said, under the sexual spores, we have zygomycetes, we have ascospores, we have the basidiospores, and we have the deuteromycetes, which is basically the fungi imperfecta. After that, arthrospores, blastospores, then we have sporangiospores, then we have chlamydospores, then we have conidia. All the other miscellaneous ones will nicely come under the asexual variety. Having said that, the classification is still not over, right? How do you identify the different vegetative states? Now, this is something again for students who are targeting INI CET, not very important for the NEET and FMG students. It's important more for INI targets. So I can see after the spores, how do they get classified on the basis of the vegetative state? Either they can look like spiral. You can very well see that over here I'm seeing that there is some spiral configuration. Or they can have a pectinate body. Pectinate is going to look like a comb basically. Pectinate is looking like a comb. Then there is a chandelier. Everyone's aware of what is a chandelier. Chandelier, the beautiful glass chandeliers that you have in big hotels, the ones that are going to hang like this. So this is also looking like the horn of a deer, antlers horn. Yes, so that is going to look like the beautiful hanging chandelier. Then if it looks like a nodule, you call it a nodular vegetative state. And if it looks like a racket, a tennis racket, then you're going to call it a racket hyphae. So what are the different forms? Let's do that quickly once again. If it's spiral, you name it like that. If it looks like a comb, it is going to be pectinate. If it looks like a hanging chandelier, you call it the same. Round like a nodule, you call it nodular. And if it looks like a tennis racket, you call it a racket hyphae. But is it only about knowing the shape? You need to know which organism shows you what. So you don't have to learn examples of all. But there are some examples that I want you to know. So spiral hyphae is going to be seen in trichophyton, mentagrophytes. I'll be showing you so many trichophyton. Why mentagrophyte? How do I learn that? Because the way you are drawing spiral, spiral is looking like an M, right? The way we had drawn spiral, spiral is looking like an M. So we can call it as mentagrophyte, shows you the spiral hyphae. Next, for pectinate, you don't have to learn an example. For chandelier, so when I said chandelier, so the way you say chandelier, you get the SH sound. Same way when you say Schonleni, so repeating, when you say chandelier versus when you say Schonleni, so trichophyton Schonleni shows you the chandelier form. That is also sorted. Coming on to nodular, you don't need to know. And the last one is going to be what? You are going to have something the toughest, that is epidermophyton flocosum. So remember, epidermophyton flocosum, it has too many F wala sound because I have learnt it as it is racket. I've not shown you the usual tennis racket. I've shown you a racket which you'll find in every Indian household, and that is the racket with which you kill the flies, right? The fly wala racket. So yes, that is what I'm going to teach you. The fly racket is going to be the shape of all the FF organisms. That is epidermophyton flocosum. So epidermophyton flocosum shows the fly racket kind of an appearance. These are the three main ones. Repeating, trichophyton mentagrophytes, M like a spiral. Trichophyton Schonleni, so Schonleni like chandelier. And epidermophyton flocosum, all the F sounds coming. So this is going to look like the fly racket. Okay, all said and done. Let's move on to the next classification that we have, and that is based on the location, the real one that is going to help us in clinical diagnosis. So the first one is going to be involving the superficial mycosis, the superficial layer. What is going to happen under it? There is something known as tinea versicolor, which we'll be talking about, along with a lot of other tinea. So all the other teneas are going to come under dermatophytes. So we have tinea versicolor and we have dermatophytes. These are going to be superficial. Then after the skin, we come down to the subcutaneous tissue. Subcutaneous tissue has MRCS. MRCS is one of the famous exams and the toughest exams that we have. So subcutaneous, what is MRCS? M is going to be for mycetoma. R is going to be for the very famous rhinosporidiosis. C is going to be for another very famous organism, that is chromoblastomycosis. And S is going to be for Sporothrix schenki or sporotrichosis. So what is MRCS? A quick recap. M stands for mycetoma, R stands for rhinosporidiosis, C is for chromoblastomycosis, and S is for sporotrichosis. Having said that, now come deeper into the organs, the deep tissues or the systems. And in these, all the dimorphic fungi are going to come. So all the dimorphic fungi, which I just now taught you, if you guys remember, body heat probably changes shape. Yes, all of those are going to come. Other than that, many opportunistic infections are going to come. Like for example, we have Candida, we have Cryptococcus, we have Aspergillus, we have Mucormycosis, So all of these remaining ones, basically, in simple words, how I have learnt it is, all the dimorphic fungi, number one, and all these opportunistic infections that we have, all of these are going to involve the organs. They will involve the different systems, right? So now we've done the classification on the location also. Number one, the superficial mycosis. Superficial is all the tenias, Taenia versicolor, Taenia coming under dermatophytes. Then subcutaneous. Subcutaneous is MRCS. Then the deep ones, deep are dimorphic and the opportunistic infections. So that wraps up our classification on the basis of the location. Moving forward, we are going to now discuss